in the house of one of the Pharisees, and this is interesting. If I read this today, I wouldn't be able to tell you anymore. But in reading this in Desire of Ages, this was Simon. This was Simon's house. Simon's house, who had seen him and wanted Jesus to come to his house so he could introduce him to all his friends. So this is kind of interesting what Mrs. White brings out here. It says, in this house, Jesus teaches 3 stories, okay? 3 stories about the cost of disciples. And it doesn't actually, you don't think about it when you're reading it, at least not me, I should say. When you read that story, you wouldn't think about it until you really start to contemplate what he's really getting at here. We're called to be disciples. You and I, each one of us are called to be disciples. And most of us want to be disciples. But in being a disciple, what does it mean for each of us? You know, what is it? What is it that we as disciples are required to do? Or what is it that Jesus has in mind for us in being disciples? 3 things are going to come out of this: humility, service, and sacrifice. In these 3 stories, and you want to call them parables, if you want to call them that, the scenes change. Yet the things that happen there are very closely related. The cost of discipleship is illustrated in each lesson. Let's have a look at verse 1. Now it happened as he went into the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath that they watched him closely. I'm going to read the rest of this. We all know the story. There was a man there who had dropsy. Now, I don't know much about dropsy, but apparently it's called hydropsy, an accumulation of excess water, pooling of fluid, swelling of soft tissue, swelling of the eyes, lower legs and feet. I've never seen that, but somebody else may have. Lane, you may have seen that, have you, in your travels?
I did. That's what Raymond had
Oh, is that right?
when he was little, but they called it, when he had it, they called it nephrotic syndrome.
Okay.
That's what it was.
Okay.
It used to be.
Okay. Anyway, Jesus makes his way to the Sabbath table dinner because this is on a Sabbath, and they've been invited. Jesus has been invited to come to this ruler of the Pharisees. Simon was quite far up as the religious leader, and he notices something. He notices something, and I want to read now Luke 14, verses 7 to 10. Okay, verses 7 to 10. So he told a parable to those who were invited when he noted how they chose the best places, saying to them, when you're invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him. And he who invited you and him come and say to you, give place to this man, and then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you were invited, go and sit down in the lowest places, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, go up higher. Then you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. Pretty interesting here. What's the key word here in this one? What are we seeing? Humility. Humility. One of the costs of discipleship is humility. Now, maybe for you this isn't an issue, okay? And for some, maybe for all of you it isn't. But it's an issue for me. It's an issue for me. And I think when I stop and think about it, I say, that's not a problem. But when I really think about it, I start saying, I don't like to be embarrassed. I don't like, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess it's just easy to say, I don't see myself as a real humble person. But I have not seen myself as a real humble person. I struggle with that. I struggled with it ever since I was very small. Anyway, it's humility, and there are many people who do have a struggle with humility, and I think all of us maybe at some point in time may have had an issue with it. Cost of discipleship is humility. Jesus' commands are not burdensome. At least I don't think they are, He just asks us to be humble. Ask to be humble. How do we apply that in our lives, though? Like, we're not at a wedding feast. We're not sitting up front, okay? In fact, in this church, most people like to sit at the back. Nobody sits at the front. Daryl. You having trouble with humility, Daryl? No, that's not what we're talking about. Jesus is using this as an illustration. How many of you have ever had road rage? Nobody? I can put my hand up. I've had it.
Once in a blue moon, I guess.
That's all I needed. I just know it once, okay? Road rage is the opposite of humility. It's anger, okay? It's an anger, and it's about somebody else getting in front of you and whatever. I thought about that, and I've had many instances of road rage where I certainly...
It's not getting in front, it's going too slow.
Pardon?
Going too slow.
Well,
Getting in front of you and going too slow.
anyway, but yet the application of humility is one deferring to one another. To defer with, but not just to defer, but to defer without being upset, without being angry, just to defer to one another. I can't say it any easier than that, okay? Less elbowing and shoving, and I don't mean that, that's not this sort of thing, but pushing ourselves to the front. And I say that, and maybe that's not a big issue here in this church, okay? But it's a big issue in the world. It is a big issue in the world, I can tell you that. How about letting others talk? Let others tell their story, instead of us being the one who want to talk and tell our story. Being a good listener is being humble. And I'll tell you, I've not always been a good listener. I'm working on it. God's working on it with me. When tempted to think high of self, compare yourself to others, and remember this big thing that but for the grace of God, there go I, or there I would be. Okay? It's God's grace. It's interesting here to think about Jesus' boldness here. Well, put yourself in this position. In his position, you've just been invited out to dinner. Okay? And all of a sudden he goes in, he sits down, the first thing he does is insults all the guests. And there's without a joke, this is an insult. He has just insulted them about the way they're living and the way they like to sit up front and be noticed and everything. I would say there might be just a little bit of tension in that room at that time. The atmosphere probably wasn't conducive to good digestion, when you think about it. Put it mildly, the table talk was probably just a little strained. But he didn't stop there. First of all, he says something to the guests. Now he goes the next step. Now he decides to tell something to the host. Now he has something to say, the one who invited him. He's about to, in words we say, you ever heard you bite the hand that feeds you? Something you never do. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. Here Jesus is about to bite the hand of the person feeding. Jesus was not looking to be politically correct or whatever. He wasn't worried about how to win friends and influence people. Jesus was trying to help these people understand where they really were and what was keeping them, okay? What was keeping them from being able and to be able to enter the kingdom of God. These are things that he needed to show them.